Okay, we're ready to go. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar entitled Planning for a Safe Return to the Office. I'm Gladys Miranda, a marketing manager at Ricoh Canada and the moderator today. Some housekeeping notes before we set off. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to you via email over the next day. We encourage and welcome questions throughout the webinar. Please note you are on listen-only mode, so if you have a question, please use the chat feature on the lower left corner of your screen. We'll flag those questions for the team to address during the question and answer period at the end. And should we run out of time, we'll ensure we contact you following the session with answers from our speakers. Our speakers today are three: Michael Costa, our Services Portfolio Manager, Amrit Sanju, Vice President of Human Resources, and Steve Smith, Director of Services Portfolio. Steve will now kick things off. Steve?
Great. Thanks, Gladys. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for attending our conference today, our web conference today. Today, we're going to look at the challenges of returning to work amidst the pandemic. We'll look at where our country is in its reopening plans, the attitudes of Canadians on returning to the office, the concerns of HR leaders like our own HR VP, Amrit Sanju, who will be joining us later in the show. We'll share our best practices and offer our thoughts on how Canadian organizations might utilize technology to help engineer a safer work environment. As I put some slides together for our webinar today, I was a little retrospective about one of my last days in office. I see myself having a casual conversation with a peer as I wait on the coffee machine before heading to my team meeting. I booked the meeting room late and had to pack the team into one of the smaller meeting rooms. After a review of a great month, a lunch with the team followed. We piled into 2 cars and drove to a popular lunch spot. The restaurant was packed, and I could easily reach over and grab something off the table next to me if the urge had moved me. In between meetings that afternoon, I worked from my desk. I don't have an office or a designed desk for that matter, as we moved to an open office environment a few years ago. We have shared work services, and on this day I was at the end of a cluster of workstations we call dog bones. I may have shaken hands with someone or whispered something in confidence. That day will differ significantly from the one I'll encounter when I return to the office. At the start of this month, our provinces began to reopen. It's happening in stages. The number of stages and the timing of these stages vary from province to province, but the objective is the same: a cautious and gradual opening of the economy that protects our healthcare system and our most vulnerable members of society. Here's where we are as of today. All provinces have at least some easing of mandated restrictions, and some provinces, typically those with lower new case rates, are already moving into the second phase of recovery. For those provinces, a broader base of businesses and personal services are reopening, which is welcome news to those in need of a new hairstyle. For at least the first 2 phases, the provinces will continue to restrict group sizes, encourage social distancing, reinforce disinfecting and hand hygiene measures, and request employers continue to encourage work-from-home practices where feasible. In the third stage, businesses that by nature have larger gatherings of customers and staff will begin to reopen. As of today, only PEI, BC, and Alberta have target dates for Stage 3 reopening. Some provinces have no firm dates for moving beyond Stage 1 or 2, and instead will make those decisions based on how they're progressing through their initial stages. So when will we get back to a fully open economy? It's difficult to predict. It may be slowed by new outbreaks, and some believe it won't happen until we have a vaccine. Regardless, it's going to have to be a carefully traveled path. As the provinces reopen for business and employers think about how to reopen their offices, what will it take to get Canadian workers back in the office? A poll of over 2,400 Canadian office workers conducted by Abacus Data at the end of April found that 12% of those currently employed say they're comfortable enough, they're ready to go back to an office today. But almost 1 in 5, 17%, say they won't be comfortable going back to an office until there's a vaccine. The remaining 71% will return conditionally. 66% of those want there to be their services, their work services to be cleaned regularly. 60% want there to be enough room to distance themselves from others. 47% want to see a reduced number of the people allowed into the office. 37% want to see mandatory face masks. It's worth noting here that workers have the right to refuse unsafe work. Health and safety concerns that are not resolved internally, for those concerns, a worker can seek enforcement by filing a complaint with the Provincial Health and Safety Enforcement Agency. The responsibility for providing a safe work environment extends beyond your employees, to your visitors and customers as well. So, looking at those conditions that our employees want before feeling comfortable returning to the office, let's take a poll here. I'm interested in finding out which of these conditions are going to be of most challenge to your organization. Here you may be able to select more than one. So go ahead and make some responses, and everyone's answered. We'll take a look at the results. Okay, slowing down, looks like just a minute more. Okay, let's have a look at the results. All right. Well, the lion's share seem to say it's around social distancing. So that's very interesting. I'm going to bring in at this point Mike Costa, Mike, to comment on these results and to also give us some thoughts, some other thoughts and insights into things that we're hearing and seeing at this point. Mike?
Hey, thanks, Steve. So from the market info Steve discussed, we saw that 71% of people are willing to return with conditions. And from our poll, it looks like having enough room to distance is a major concern on the call today. But let's take that a step further. In the past 2 months, we've spoken with customers, partners, and internal subject matter experts, and some of the backbone concerns that they are considering are listed here. Let's start with physical distancing. What will that mean as we return to the office? HR, possibly working with facilities management, will have to set guidelines for floor occupancy. In some cases, this may mean that certain departments come into the office on specific days. It could mean that an employer decides some departments or individuals continue to work from home going forward. As you can imagine, this will have to be dynamic, as the needs will change over time. Some customers we spoke to are saying that the initial back to the office plan may only be for 20% of the workforce. This would increase to 35%, 45%, etc., as the situation improves. Let's think about spacing. Increased space between desks is a reality. Consider that a 2-meter radius around each person could mean an empty workspace on each side of that individual. Think about how to deal with drop-in or free address desks. How do we keep them clean? Do you know who's sitting there? Do you know if they just came in for a couple hours, or are they spending the whole day? In some cases, where there's not enough space for 2 meters between desks, then plexiglass barriers could do the trick. We've seen this in some of the retail establishments we've been visiting lately. Finally, I think we'll have to rethink the common areas, the coffee stations, the lunchrooms, lounge areas, washrooms. There's many examples here. These would need to be re-engineered to provide for a touch-free, safe environment. Meeting room management. As you can imagine, meeting rooms are a major part of the discussion today. We've all been packed into a meeting room at one time or another. We often jump from room to room in back-to-back meetings all day. First, a reduction in meeting room occupancy is a must to ensure the distance guidelines. For IT, they need to reflect these meeting room changes in Outlook. This will ensure employees are confident that the room they're booking has the correct capacity. Meeting organizers should consider booking hybrid model meetings, actually telling invitees whether they are to join virtually or physically. This can help avoid confusion and overbooking. Also, rooms may need upgraded video conferencing solutions. Ensuring employees' engagement and the balance between employees working from home and coming into the office, you'll need to ensure employee productivity. With all these changes, we've had some customers express the need to monitor these rooms to ensure compliance with cameras or sensors. And lastly, let's consider cleaning policy. Think about those back-to-back meetings that we're all used to today. How do we manage cleaning these surfaces? Will there be a policy for employees to clean the room before leaving or before entering? Where can they get the required cleaning materials? The message must be clear, and it needs to be part of a corporate culture change. In terms of employee safety, some of the main considerations include monitoring space usage. This is part of ensuring employees are following the guidelines. This is also a part of the dynamic environment and knowing when and where to make changes. Contact tracing. Understand where employees are sitting and what days that they are in to allow for contact tracing. In the event of an illness, it'll be important to understand who else was in the office or at the row of desks or in any particular meeting. Consider touchless print. Again, this is about creating an environment where employees don't have to come into physical contact. Walk up, scan your badge, grab your document, and go. And lastly, visitor management. How many visitors are allowed in the building? What days are they allowed to visit? Are there designated visitor areas? How do they sign in? Can we find out if they've been ill or have they been traveling? Do we temperature screen them? These are all new considerations. Looking at the staggered arrival and departure time strategy, departments or floors or teams, some organizations will have to schedule in-office hours to ensure not everybody is in the communal areas at the same time. Elevators, lobbies, coffee stations, these would all benefit from the approach. Finally, the concern around change management. Empowering employees to stay home when sick, or even if a dependent is sick. We've all been there. A tight deadline, a face-to-face meeting with the boss. We're just not feeling our best, but you know what? We tough it out. We head into the office, we get it done. This mentality will have to change going forward. Also, consider increased communications from management and training on the new world of work to help guide employees through these tough times. Also consider increased resources around mental health. It'll be key. Okay. So now that we've discussed some of the key concerns, let's introduce Amrit Sandhu, our VP of HR, to discuss what they actually mean to an office environment. Amrit?
Great. Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for those out west. Thanks for the tee up, Michael. And, there's a lot of concerns where, clearly it's going to take a fair bit of effort for everybody to return back. I reflect on Ricoh's own journey into the new world of work over the last 5 years and modernizing our workplace like so many other organizations across Canada and North America have done. We've moved to an open concept, gone to a mix of dedicated and drop-in seating. We've added huddle rooms. We've gone to a shared print environment. We've created communal cafe and lunch areas, lounges, all around kind of modernizing the work area. And we know that with the phased-in approach to reopening the economy, there's going to be a phased-in approach to reopening the office. There isn't going to be one day in the immediate future that's going to be like, okay, everybody's in the office today. It's going to take a systematic approach to being comfortable there. The employee trust is going to be such an important element around bringing people back to work and people feeling comfortable going back to work. I reflect back on Steve's opening slide. 17% of the folks right now are saying, I'm not sure I'm comfortable returning back to the office without a vaccine. So how do we earn that trust back, and how do we bring folks back effectively? So the first step to kind of bringing folks back from a safe point of view is redefining the purpose of the office. There's some emerging realities that have happened over the course of the last 10 weeks. The office is no longer a place where you report to just get work done, right? What we've discovered is most office work can be done almost anywhere. We've proven that now for 10 weeks. There's been debate for the last 10 years around mobility of work, and that's been proven over the course of the last 10 weeks. Work can be done anywhere. And associated with that work being done anywhere is that the notion of productivity and how we measure is changing from the output that I can see to the results that I can measure. And the notion of knowledge work has become universal. Most every single job that's in an office environment is now knowledge work. And the other thing is that work, the perception of work being done by people now needs, as part of that digital transformation of where the office is going, is work is now being done people, by AI, and by machines. So if those are the emerging realities, how do we redefine the purpose of the office? It's no longer just a location to report to, right? So as we think about how we reopen, what are we reopening for and to what end? And when I think about the office is a place that provides a sense of continuity and community, right? It's a place where it creates experiences. It's a place that amplifies your brand. It creates the environment where you can reinvent your business. Many of us are confronted with how do we reinvent our business. And it's also a place where we continually renew our culture, right? We're all working in this virtual environment, and it's provided a ton of flexibility, a ton of great successes, but it's also come with a lot of challenges. And those challenges are part of what recognizing the new purpose of the office is going to be around. And those cultural elements, those community elements, amplifying the brand are going to be important tenets of why we're coming back to the office, not just because we happen to have the real estate. So as I reflect on the concerns that Michael highlighted and the concerns from what is the new purpose of the office, I think, well, okay, what's the recipe for that safe return? And I've been, a number of conversations with my peers across Canada, and as we work through it, kind of, creating this four ingredient recipe, if you will. And the four components that I see being critical is addressing those concerns that Michael highlighted earlier. The first one is screening. Second one is going to be PPE. Third one is going to be hygiene. And the fourth one is going to be physical distancing. Right? The key part to driving change, the very first control that we have is people screening whether or not today is a good day for me to go into work. If I have a fever, if I have a cough, if I am sneezing, if I've got the sniffles, I need to self-screen not to come into the office. But then there also needs to be that secondary screening of, okay, I've now come to the office or I arrive at the building either as an employee, as a visitor, as a vendor, customer, whatever the case may be, is what's the screening practice that occurs at the entry point of the office. And, Michael touched on, we've all worn that heroic badge. I was so sick that time, but I got in there and I finished that project by the deadline. That the new hero badge is, hey, I wasn't feeling great. I made the safe call and I stayed home and I produced the results. But we got to engineer for that screening. Then complementing that screening is what's the right PPE for us to have in our workplace? We are going to be confronted with this question of masks, right? What face coverings, where and when and how? Am I going to require or request or suggest face coverings in my work environment? Is it up to the front door? Is it up to your desk? Is it in the communal areas? How do we approach the PPE question? Next component is going to be the hygiene. The easy part is we're going to increase janitorial standards and protocols. We're going to increase the frequency of cleaning. We're going to use better disinfectants. That's going to be an element of it. But hands down, the single best thing that's been confirmed throughout the last number of months around preventing the expansion of this pandemic in work locations has been hand hygiene. A ton of stats are coming out. Then workplaces where there's a habit of washing your hands at least 10 times a day have a far less likelihood of an infection spreading inside of that work location than others, whether that's be in a healthcare setting, call centers, warehouses, whatever the case may be. And that will then expand to our general offices. And you go, wow, 10 times a day, that's a lot. It is, but the hand hygiene that we need is if you're entering a work location, you wash your hands so you don't bring an infection into the workplace. If you're leaving a work location, you wash your hands so you don't take an infection out of the workplace. If you're going into a meeting room, you wash your hands. If you're coming out of one, you wash your hands. If you've been sitting in the same spot for more than an hour or so, you go and you wash your hands. That habit of building hand hygiene of 10 times a day is going to be so critical. And then the piece that's going to put a real task on office layouts is this whole notion of physical distancing. How do we help people work at least 2 meters apart? So those are the 4 ingredients. Any one of those ingredients by themselves, they only get you so far. You put the 4 ingredients together, I think we end up with a pretty good recipe of how do we return to the office. And those are the 4 ingredients that we're looking at as we think about Ricoh's return to the office. So let me kick it over to a poll. And this probably builds a little bit off of Steve's question earlier. Of those 4 ingredients, as you reflect on your own journeys back to the office, which of the 4, PPE, screening, physical distancing, or hygiene, which is top of mind for you? Give it about a minute for folks to respond. All right, we're up to about a third participation. I'll give it about 10 more seconds for anybody else. All right. Hit the results. All right. Hands down, 2 clear leaders, hygiene and physical distancing. All right, that's really helpful. I'll try to gear as the recipe conversation as I go forward onto those 2 elements in particular. All right, so this is our floor map, and it's busy. It's got a little bit of everything. And then we take those 4 key categories, screening, PPE, hygiene, and physical distancing, and how do we think about each one of them? What are the key elements of the concern areas that Michael highlighted that fit underneath each one of those? I know this is a busy map, so let me get into the detail. Right? The first one is around the new normal is reception, right? And this is where the screening tools become important, right? So how do we do symptom screening? Whether they be self-assessments, whether it be an app that goes out to every employee at the beginning of the day before they head out, or whether it's a screening tool when people arrive at the building. How do we deal with temperature screening? 37% of employees in a recent Gartner report that came out said they are supportive of temperature screening coming into the workplace. How do you address that? And how do you address visitor management and protocols? There'll be a whole blow-up stream around that. The second one is going to be around PPE. Is as people come in, what is your policy for PPE? What's your policy on face coverings specifically? Right? Where and when to wear masks. Those are going to be some difficult decisions that organizations are going to have to wrestle with based on their respective work location. But let me get into the other areas that I think were of the biggest concern for the folks on this call. And so in those common spaces, hygiene becomes paramount. And as we reflect on hygiene, we're, number one, it's second on the list here, but number one in my mind is the hand washing station. Do we have hand washing stations, and do they fit a touchless environment, right? So, and then you coincide that with washrooms being, how do we transform those into a touchless environment? And then we go into our common areas, our lunchrooms, our elevators, our shared meeting spaces, and how do we address those? Positioning of HVAC and cleaning of air is going to be critical as we think about the hygiene. How well does your building's HVAC circulate air? How much is recycled air? Are there HEPA filters built into the HVAC? There's a ton of literature emerging around the use of UV and where it does or doesn't have an effect on cleaning air. And that's something that, for each one of us that has responsibilities for a facility, is having that conversation with the property management or facility management is going to be important. As we'll be talking through the janitorial standards, in terms of what surfaces get cleaned, how often, throughout the day, and combining those kind of, third-party, janitorial standards is what are going to be the clean desk and clean meeting room policies that we need to introduce for our employees. If you're sitting at a shared desk, the expectation will need to become is that you are cleaning your desk prior to sitting down with some kind of disinfectant, and then you're cleaning the desk as you leave. And then the next person repeats the activity so that you increase the likelihood that if there was a virus on the surface, that we've been able to disinfect it. Similar for meeting rooms. As we go in and out of meeting rooms, how do we address the cleaning of those? Having those back-to-back meetings, people running out 5 minutes late and the next group keyed up right outside probably isn't going to be viable out of the beginning. So how do we allow for clean meeting rooms, whether it be employee-driven or through a janitorial service, and how do we introduce that? And then the big piece around this hygiene is going to be how do we introduce a touchless environment, whether that be through automated doors, voice-activated elevators, no-touch garbage and recycling bins, hands-free plumbing fixtures, motion sensors to turn things on and off, like lights in a room versus relying on a switch. Are there ways to introduce self-cleaning technology into your workplace? And can we introduce digital hands-free or reduced touch technologies, whether that be in your print environment, in your whiteboards, your coffee machine, whatever the case may be? How do we digitize and reduce touch on surfaces? Those are all elements that we're considering as we work through returning folks to our 30-some sites across the country. Physical distancing. And I think this was first on the poll. And I think right now the restaurants openings that are happening in parts of Canada are, allowing for capacity up to 50%. I think it's, as I reflect on our workplace, I have a hard time on any given day that we're going to open our office and seeing 50% of our folks come in. As Michael touched earlier, we probably will take a much more graduated approach, something closer to 20-25% coming in the first day in terms of phasing in our floor occupancy and then, building out from there. In building in that occupancy is we're also going to have to think about how do we mark our desk as available or as unavailable. Right? You don't want Michael and I showing up and deciding, hey, we really want to talk about this webinar sitting right beside each other. We want to make sure that you've deliberately created space. And so how do you mark those seats available or not available in that shared desk environment? How do we increase the space between desks? How do we put natural or physical barriers between individuals, but also between work teams? So if there is an issue that happens in an office, it's isolated versus goes through the entire work location. There was an article I read last week in a call center environment where one person got sick. Subsequently, 3/4 of the team over the course of the next couple of days as that person continued to come into work, ended up 2/3 of that team ended up getting sick. The fascinating thing around the 2/3 of that office that got sick, 90% of them sat within the one area where that call center was. Almost none got sick past the lunchroom. So how do we build in some natural barriers between teams so that you don't cross infect folks? So building those physical and natural barriers, both from a personal point of view as well as a team's point of view, becomes important. And Michael touched on, reducing meeting room capacity. We're not going to be able to put 4 people in a 80 square foot huddle room. That might be a 1-person room, might at most a 2-person room as we first come back. And our boardrooms we're used to putting in a number of people sitting shoulder to shoulder. Those probably get reduced to at least 50% capacity, if not something less than that, so that we can build in. That means physically removing those chairs, physically changing the meeting capacity of that room so that bookings don't happen incorrectly. And then how do we think about repurposing our underutilized areas? And how do we build traffic flow? Right? And, we had this conversation throughout the city of Toronto, and I know a number of other cities did, around do we make sidewalks one way? And that is something that we're going to have to consider for our workplaces, is how do we think about our traffic flow? Do we create one-way traffic? How do we create well-marked routes? How do we make easy wayfinding so folks aren't going from one area to another in a meandering route? But those patterns are well-marked and clear and concise, and that we're being mindful of not taking someone from one team into another area when we don't need to. So the traffic flow is going to be an important part of that consideration around the return to work, depending on the size of your floor. So that's a ton of stuff. We've started kind of putting our spreadsheet together with our recipe of what are the things that we need to think about as we're working through our respective locations. And this is a bit of that recipe checklist that we're using, whether it be on the screening side, the PPE, the hygiene, the physical distancing. And as I kind of shared, each one of those has many, many subcomponents from the previous slide. The one area, and it was Michael's last concern area, and I wanted to highlight here, is the wrapper around this recipe needs to be effective change management. Right? It's going to require a very dedicated and deliberate approach, training folks on new workplace policies, empowering employees to stay home if they're feeling ill, increase resources around mental health, sharing best practices for maintaining safe and clean workspaces with each other, reinforcing those based on how you actually observe your employees acting, and instilling those new behaviors as everyone returns. And they're all coming from a different place. That 12%, they're like, yeah, send me in today. I'm ready to go, coach. Versus those are like, oh my gosh, I'm really nervous about this. Folks are going to be coming from very different ends. So it's not just that you're taking one homogenous kind of group and trying to bring to new behavior. You're taking very different ends of the spectrum to new behaviors. And how do we do that? And the one thing, I've spent a ton of time with my health and safety manager as she's guided us through this journey over the last several months. And the one thing that she's really reinforced with me is that change management's important, and we need to complement human behavior, but we need to do that by engineering controls in. Right? Relying just on behavioral change takes a long time, and we can't afford it in the early days of return to work. So how do we build in engineered controls right out of the gate? And so as you think through this checklist, think about those engineered controls and how we can introduce those. And let me introduce Michael back to talk through some of the Ricoh solutions that might help you engineer your environment. Over to you, Michael.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. So as we've discussed, a safe return to the office needs to address many challenges. From a technology perspective, desk booking is a solution that we're getting a lot of interest today from our customers. So as a combination of software and sensor technology, this solution helps customers to solve for some concerns like capacity planning, social distancing, contact tracing, and cleaning and sanitation. So what does this look like in the day-to-day environment? Well, with this solution, the administrator can easily block off desks or even groups of desks directly from an interactive floor plan. This is a great feature to enable capacity planning. Also, they can create policies for desks where they have days open and days closed and automatically generate service tickets for cleaning, knowing that desk won't be released for booking until cleaning is complete. Finally, in the event of an illness, the admin can see where the employee was sitting on any given day and see who's checked in around them, and this will allow for contact tracing. Also, the admin can block off that entire section for perhaps a more thorough cleaning. For the employee, it's simple. When you need to be in the office, you log into the application on your PC or mobile phone, schedule your desk, and it will be ready for you when you arrive. Some other solutions that we're getting a lot of interest from our customers are meeting room booking and visitor management. Although most of the concerns for meeting rooms is around capacity, we do have some customers that have touchscreen booking solutions. Adding a QR code scanning or RFID scanning at the room door can help with this touchless environment. Also, being able to start, stop, or extend the meeting from a mobile app, that's a huge advantage. Also, let's think about how we manage visitors. How do you keep them safe? A touchless self-check-in solution is a major part of the discussion today. An employee creates a meeting request in Outlook with an external participant. That visitor will be notified, and upon accepting the meeting, they'll be given a check-in questionnaire. This could include questions like, have you been feeling ill in the past 2 weeks? Or have you traveled abroad in the past month? If the questionnaire answers meet the criteria, then the visitor can check in through their mobile phone without any manual intervention. A quick QR code scan from the visitor's mobile phone is all that's required upon arrival. The app can even guide you to the meeting room location in the building. You could take it a step further as well. Some other technologies in the forefront of a safe return to work include thermal imaging cameras and software, so visitors can, and even employees, for that matter, can be screened for temperature before even entering the office. I've seen proximity sensors, personal sensors that are wearable, and when you get into a specific distance, so for in this case 2 meters, it'll buzz just as a reminder that you're getting too close. And there are a lot more other touchless environment products like touchless print, which we discussed, touchless doors, water stations, coffee stations, sanitizer and mask dispensers. The list is quite long. I saw a question in the participant feedback Q&A just saying, how do you have a coffee machine in a communal area? In other countries on the factory floor, they're using a mobile app to order their coffee, and they walk up to the machine, scan the code. Obviously, you bring your own mug. You just hold it under the dispenser, and it goes ahead and pours it right into your cup. These are the types of things that we're rethinking. How do we do it better? For me, really, it's about how can I use technology to help engineer behavior for safety. So today we spoke mostly about communication services and managed services, but here's a quick look at Ricoh's overall services. For over 80 years, we've been imagining change. Today, that includes helping our customers navigate the demands of remote work, maintain business continuity, and keep their essential workplaces operational with our range of services and technologies. If you have any other questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out. I really wanted to thank everyone for attending this call today. Going forward, here's a quick look at our upcoming webinars from May 26th through June 11th. Please feel free to join. Let's move now to some questions. Gladys, will you take over from here?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Michael, Amrit, and Steve. So we'll move into the question period with our presenters and subject matter experts. We have one question from the audience. This looks like for you, Amrit. Are there any areas that should remain closed?
Yeah, I think, again, this is where, following some of the guidance from our provincial health authorities will help. I think as we think about returning back to the office, particularly in offices where there's gyms or, things like that are probably later on the phased-in open, probably should remain closed. I think that's an important way to kind of think about it. So I think there's areas like that probably should remain closed. I think it was a great question in the chat as well around the coffee machines, a touchless coffee machine in a communal area. It was funny. I was having a conversation with our health and safety manager this morning in our regular one-on-one, and the issue of coffee machines came up. And how do we approach coffee machines right out of the gate? And I think each location, we have to think about what kind of coffee machine they have. Is there a touchless option? Is there not? Because there are so many points of contact at a coffee machine, interesting enough. There's the point of, if you have a pod, right, you're selecting the pod, so you're touching the pod rack. If you are then touching the screen to select what coffee you're making. If you're opening a cupboard to grab a mug. If you're opening a fridge to grab the cream or milk. If you are going to the sugar container. If you're going to a stir stick. Right there, it's like 6, 7 different touch points where you're physically touching something. And so I think coffee, it's going to be things like that that are going to be so interesting around how do you address those in your individual workplace. And are there controls you could put in? And we just take a wait and see on some of those things and say, hey, you know what, we're not ready for that yet. We're going to return back in a very gradual way in some of these high-touch environments we're just not ready to do yet until we have a better sense of how the return goes. That was a great question that popped up.
Thank you, Amrit. This next one looks like for you, Steve. Is there market data around the need for temperature checks within the office? And do you think this will become a reality?
Okay. Yeah, so I have seen some data. It has showed up on some other polls. I think that earlier Amrit referenced a Gartner stat, that 37% of people would be wanting to have some sort of screening. And what it is, it's a lot of the technology that's out there today, the thermal imaging cameras, they take a surface or a skin surface temperature. And the problem with it is, I think it gives a lot of confidence to people who are coming into the workplace environment, but there will be a lot of false positives and false negatives, as you know, a lot of people who may be shedding the virus may not be symptomatic, as we've come to know, and people can get you can get a false reading if people are, you know, coming in on a hot day or had been, you know, carrying a box and or sweating or something along those nature. So you need a secondary, I think. It's good to create an alert, but you would need a secondary check, that person to be diverted, and somehow, you know, a healthcare person on site can do a more accurate testing of temperature. And do I think it's going to be a reality? I think it will for quite a few. In fact, UAW suggested none of its members could go back into the factories until they've been tested. Even Starbucks said the same thing, that their employees aren't going back into the store without being tested. So I think there's going to be a number of companies that make that policy, yes.
Great. Thank you, Steve. I have one here from Melina. What about social events, keeping in mind physical distancing, for example, employee barbecues, appreciation events? This seems like more for you, Amrit.
Yeah, it was interesting. In that similar Gartner study, one of the one of the questions is, what do employees want organizations to do when they reopen the office? And I think 29% or thereabouts said, morale boosting events like free snacks or events would be one of those things. So I think there's again, part of that sense of community and experience that the office brings that I think many of us are missing, sitting in their respective home dining rooms, offices, or wherever they might be able to perch a chair on a given day, will want to get to. So I think there's going to be a desire from our employees. I think any one of us that's organizing an event like that is going to need to be really mindful around, the physical distancing, which the question implied, but also all those shared touch surfaces. So is that single-serve meals that come in through a catering service, or is that a buffet or a barbecue where you have communal tongs and things like that? And we know buffets are going to be later on the opening scale. So I think there is going to be a desire from employees to do that, to build that sense of community back up. We haven't seen each other in a long time other than through cameras. So I think there's going to be a desire, but I think anybody organizing it is going to probably need to go through a bit of a checklist around how do we minimize the hygiene risks, as well as how do we maximize the physical distancing in that event.
Thank you, Amrit. We have time for one last question. Michael, this looks like it's for you. Regarding visitor management, what does it mean to have questionnaires during check-in, and what does the process look like for that?
Oh, okay, good question. So the software provides an area for questionnaires. So what it's doing there is it's fully customizable. So, if I'm in Outlook and I create my meeting and I invite someone external, it automatically tags on this questionnaire that can go out. In today's environment, I would imagine that a lot of the questions are going to be around illness or travel. So you could actually pre-populate this questionnaire to go out to visitors that they have to fill that in before they're technically invited. If they click yes, I actually have a temperature, I've had a fever in the past 2 weeks, they'll be automatically prompted to speak to the meeting organizer and go ahead and make other arrangements. And if they go ahead and everything's okay, then they'll get the QR code that when they get into the building or the front lobby, they can, again, just scan it. They don't have to touch anything, and they'll even get a map that shows them sort of where they need to go. That's the process in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have for questions today, but Jamie, we'll get back to you from the responders via email. On behalf of the entire Ricoh team, I want to thank everyone for joining us. In a moment when you exit the meeting, you'll have a chance to provide feedback on today's session. Your feedback is really appreciated and goes towards helping us produce better content and improve the experience for future webinars. As well, a reminder to watch your inbox, and the next day you'll receive the webinar recording, as well as information on how to reach our Ricoh consultants to learn more about how we can help further adapt to the new world of work. Have a great rest of the week.